This was the most successful launch of any ETF in all history, which tells you it's not just an ETF. It's that the idea of Bitcoin itself is resonating with people. So if there were 100 Bitcoin being produced by miners every day, whatever the number is, right now, after April 20th, it goes to 50. So there's more people coming into the market, which is new demand, and new supply is shrinking. Because this asset is the best performing asset in all recorded human history. Bitcoin itself has done 20 million% since 2012. It has produced 150% annualized returns since 2012. Ethereum has done, which is another cryptocurrency, about 170%, and Solana 190% or 200%. We are in the crypto macro spring to summer transition. That is when liquidity starts coming into the system. It happens to correspond with the US election cycle, because obviously politicians can't help but give out candy around election time.
Yes, of course.
It's also the Bitcoin halving time. So Bitcoin halving reduces the supply. And then there was the ETF. So basically, we've got a perfect setup of liquidity, plus new demand, plus reduced supply. And so the rest of the year should play out the same way. I mean, I continue to be very bullish this year and very bullish for most of next year. Because Bitcoin is basically a share of a network, the more people who join the network, the more value goes up. So as the ETF brings people in, as people start fearing the governments and their deficits, they start looking for different solutions. One of the reasons gold has been rallying is the same. So what we're seeing is this was the most successful launch of any ETF in all history, which tells you it's not just an ETF. It's that the idea of Bitcoin itself is resonating with people. They kind of know they're getting screwed somewhere by the system, and this feels like a way of getting higher returns with more volatility, but it kind of saves them from what is going on. So let's assume that this is the largest ETF launch in history, and a lot of newbies have come in. Well, it's happening at a magic time. The magic time is what's known as the Bitcoin halving. So new Bitcoin comes onto the market via miners, Bitcoin miners, who undergo huge kind of mathematical calculations to produce a Bitcoin. There is a fixed number of Bitcoins that can be produced each year. So it's a competition to produce them. So you need a lot of computing power. And then every 4 years, the algorithm of Bitcoin itself halves the number. So if there were 100 Bitcoin being produced by miners every day, whatever the number is, right now, after April 20th, it goes to 50. So there's more people coming into the market, which is new demand, and new supply is shrinking. So all the time, the only supply is really sellers of Bitcoin who hold Bitcoin right now. But Bitcoin's one of these weird assets where 80% of all holders just hoard it. So that mechanism is driving the valuation up of Bitcoin over time. Now, it also means that people start to see this asset going up because there's less supply and lots of demand, and it joins more and more people. Because this asset is the best performing asset in all recorded human history. Bitcoin itself has done 20 million% since 2012. It has produced 150% annualized returns since 2012. Ethereum has done, which is another cryptocurrency, about 170%, and Solana 190% or 200%. So this asset is by far and away the greatest performing asset in all of humanity. And that gets people's attention, obviously, when people's returns have been low and people can't get out of the wealth trap.
I want you to explain it in a way where a rock hits somebody in the head and they have to go out tomorrow and get off of zero. They have to not be zero exposure to Bitcoin.
Okay. Think of why most people have bought gold. It's to protect themselves from the action of central banks. It has proven itself over several thousand years to be a way of having a store of value. Bitcoin is that for a digital age. Okay, most people know that story. They don't understand the other side of the story. Is why does nobody feel as wealthy as they thought they should be? You know, particularly if you're a bit older, you're like, why are my savings not as much as I thought they would be, or I can't afford as much? Right, that's the big conundrum. And the fact is that particularly since 2008, when we broke the world because of debt, we have been using the printing of money to try to paper over the cracks, because economic growth from an aging population is slower. We don't have much productivity because people are retiring. And we've got too much debt, so people have to service the debt. So the central banks have been doing a bit of magic, which is printing of money. At one point, it was called quantitative easing. Now they don't do that as much anymore because everyone knows that game, because that's the money printer go burr. So what they do is they inject liquidity into the system, whether through all these weird things you hear about, like reverse repo market, stuff like that. Basically, it's to hide the printing of money, put it into the system. When you look at that on a globalized level, because everybody's doing it, you're debasing the level of fiat currency. And what that means is your dollar today buys you less assets tomorrow. We buy assets to save money for future consumption. So if I were to buy gold today, it's because I want to release it in future and I want its purchasing power protected for it to go up. Now, when you look at what's happening with the debasement of currency, they're debasing currency by about 8% on year on average amongst all the global central banks. Add in about 3 to 4% global inflation, you have 12% hurdle rate on your assets before you actually make any money. So your savings, you need to be making 12%. Now, since 2012, the S&P 500 has made 12% annualized. The NASDAQ has made about 24% annualized. So tech stocks have helped. But crypto is the one that really offsets this and allows you to generate a lot of wealth. So if you're in your 50s like me, or your 60s, and you're thinking, I just don't know if my retirement savings are enough, then a small allocation to an asset that does 150% a year will compound massively and will help you in having purchasing power in your retirement, because nobody wants to be broke when they're 85 years old. Actual debasement of currency that makes assets look like they're going up. So the Venezuelan stock market, if you ever see a chart, looks like it goes vertical. It looks like the best performing stock market in the world.
Right, of course.
When you put it in Venezuelan bolivars, it's down 90%.
Right.
It's because they've been devaluing the bolivar. Every single asset on Earth versus Bitcoin since 2012 is down 99.9%.
When the ETF came out, there were pundits saying, oh, the ETF is priced in. Remember that? Someone said, it's priced in. Was it priced in?
None of us expected $10 billion of demand in 6 weeks or whatever stupid number it was, right?
Okay.
It was.
All right, but
we kind of thought it might do it in a year, because that's what gold did, GLD in its first year. But it did it in a record short amount of time, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So, no, it wasn't priced in. We didn't realize how many ordinary people, RAAs and investors, are starting to realize this issue that you're talking about is I need something to protect my wealth into the future and maybe make me money, not just protect my savings, but I want to make some money too. And this does that. As it says, if you hold Bitcoin over a few years, you can buy something like 5 times as much S&P 500 just in a few years. So your purchasing power is going up dramatically every year you own it. And that even takes into account the fact that it goes down every 4 years a significant amount. Over the long run, it doesn't really matter. But what is not priced in is the liquidity cycle that comes around the same time. Around election years, as I mentioned before, We get a lot of liquidity coming in. And people aren't very good at forecasting now. Even though everyone knows about the halving, nobody figures about liquidity. So they kind of take current market conditions and say, well, if you remove the supply, everything will be fine. But what actually happens is because liquidity comes into the markets, demand starts exploding at the same time as supply. And it always takes everybody by surprise. Now, it's not a one-day event. It's not like suddenly you wake up on the 20th of April and Bitcoin's up, 50%. It tends to kind of chop around that period because people are like, well, it's in the price. And then before you know it, by June, Bitcoin's at 85, 95,000, something like that. And then you're off to the races, and then there's more demand comes in, because remember we talked before that as price goes up, as number go up, more people get involved.
Right.
And there's less supply. So it starts to get really reflexive. So it kind of gets really squeezy, and that goes on for a period of time, usually about a year and a half after the halving.
Cryptocurrencies that are, they're working towards decentralization, perhaps not as perfect as Bitcoin in terms of its decentralization, but they're assets where we can add a layer or a smart contract on, and we can create transactions and activity. So which ones of those do you like? You mentioned some of them in February, but let's go back to them. And by the way, you mentioned Solana. I stuck you with a price prediction, and the Solana has moved up a lot since you mentioned it. So tell me a little bit about these layer ones and the smart contracts, and where are they going? What's the future, Raoul?
So think of a blockchain, a layer one blockchain, like the Bitcoin is a blockchain, but it's not used for much yet. They're building applications on it now. But there's other ones like Ethereum is basically another layer to the internet that allows the transfer and storage of value, whether it's digital assets or even real world assets. You can have contracts on chain, stuff like this. So that kind of sits on top of the internet. And there's a few variations of this. One is the Ethereum virtual machine, which is Ethereum. The cryptocurrency, Ethereum, is your share and your payment system to use that network. Right, it's just like a mobile phone network. You might use T-Mobile. Okay, great. And you pay your bills to T-Mobile. You pay using Ethereum, which is their native token. Okay, pretty straightforward. But there's a couple of competing ones that are big. The main competing one is Solana. So Solana is a faster, cheaper blockchain, maybe less decentralized, but certainly less deep and broad in the number of developers working on it, number of applications, but it's rising up fast. So that is another system. So you might find another 5G provider that's not T-Mobile, and you might want to use them instead. And maybe they've got different benefits. Then on top of that, there's another type of blockchain that's coming up in the background, which is the Move protocol, which came out of Facebook, DM. And there's a blockchain like SUI, which is another very fast, very cheap, but very innovative blockchains. So they all kind of allow different mechanisms what to use. They're like different computer systems, where some have different benefits over others. So there's about 4 or 5 of these that are gaining traction. SUI's earlier stage, so that might be put with some of the other early ones out there. But Solana and Ethereum are the kind of big daddies of this space that have been growing. There's lots of activity and being used.